All right, my friends, welcome back to another episode of the Build Show podcast. That's right, my weekly time to get together with you guys and go deep. And I got a fantastic topic, very timely. You know, we're just finishing up this big project we've done called the rigour build. It's my first time really building a house start to finish and documenting the entire series. And with me in the studio today, I've got Justin that you probably remember from the early videos. Justin is the head guy on the digital side of Builders First Source's strategy group. And, you know, we use their digital tools throughout this entire build to really pre-plan everything incredibly well. And on this episode in particular, we're talking about pre-planning for the MEP side of your builds. And I've got also with us in studio a guest that does this on a regular basis for literally thousands of homes. Their company is quite large. And so we're going to dig into both of these guys of really what's the future for MEP planning, what's the future for the builders that are frankly a little bigger than me and maybe even a little bigger than you. We're kind of thinking about that volume size builder, that builder that's building 100 houses a year. Because if we're going to really move the needle on well-built homes, we need all the builders, not just the really nerdy custom guys, to up their game. And so I'm going to really dig in with these guys and find out what's happening in that world. What could go better, and also what are some things that are actually probably happening really well that you and I may or may not be aware of. With that being said, from the rigour Build Studios in Austin, Texas, let's get going. Hey, before we jump in with Matthew and Justin, I want to say a big thanks to our two podcast sponsors. First up, Huber Engineered Woods. You know, they were all over this project called the rigour build. We use their amazing products on the outside, which of course you guys are very familiar with, the zip system sheathing. We achieved a 0.50 ACH 50 by monopoly framing this. We use the digital tools services through Builders First Source to do monopoly framing. This was my first job in a long time with trusses, and we clipped the trusses on the outside wall so we could monopoly frame it. So the zip system sheathing on the walls actually touched the zip system on the roof. We taped that joint. We used just a little bit of liquid flash between the concrete foundation and the bottom of the zip, and boom, we blew a 0.50 ACH 50. That's not taping off windows and doors. That was a straight up Pella package. That really shows the power of Huber's system and getting a house not just to be incredibly waterproof, but also very airtight. We're big fans around here at the Build Show of all the Huber products, so go check them out if you're not familiar. Also want to say thank you to the guys at Arklin. This is a brand new company with a brand new product that I didn't know about it. I shouldn't say it. They're not a brand new company. They've been around for decades. But they came out with this product called FirePoint that they demoed at the International Builder Show. And they sent me ahead of the IBS show a couple samples that I could actually put to my own fire tests. And I got to tell you, this is a game changer product if you're in a WUI area, a wildland urban interface. They make a CDX plywood, half-inch CDX plywood, that has a very thin coating on the outside. It's an intumescent coating. Do you remember when we were kids and we had that firework that was a little black pill, they called it a black snake, and you'd light that little pill on fire and it would expand seemingly forever? That's basically the same technology that's on the face of this sheathing. So when this sheathing sees fire, the face expands and pushes the fire back so that no oxygen reaches the surface of the CDX plywood. And on a 1 hour rated assembly, their product actually gives you over 90 minutes of holdout before the CDX plywood will catch fire. Super interesting product, but the thing I really like about it is I don't need to deal with gypsum on the job. Now I can just have my framers install regular old plywood. To them, it just looks like a black plywood, but to you and I, that's gonna give me a part of a 1 hour rated assembly. So super interesting product. You can learn more on the Arklin website. Again, the name of the product is FirePoint. All right, Matthew, Justin, thank you for taking time to come see me today. These guys actually traveled quite a bit of distance. Matthew Cooper, you're the COO of PEG.
Correct.
Which is an acronym that doesn't mean anything, but really
Correct.
What you guys do, if I understand, Matthew, is you guys do full MEP design on a very large scale for big builders. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. We do full MEPs for a variety, even small builders and custom builders, but predominantly for production builders all across the U.S., licensed in all 50 states. We're also one of the largest HERS raters in the country, so we see and inspect a ton of houses.
Yeah, like in the thousands a year, right?
Yeah, over 50,000 a year.
Oh my gosh. And you guys know Justin. Justin Pratt, you've been on the podcast with me many times. You've been on the Riesinger Build series with me a bunch. How do you know Matthew, Justin? Because you actually hooked me up with Matthew.
Yeah, so Matthew and I have worked together on a couple of projects, but through association with what we're doing with modeling, it came to be that, hey, we want to look at using a company that can then look at the Revit-based model, give us the designs. We put it in when we're doing the build optimized collision detection, but having that technology with what he does, including the Energy Star rating, just was a great marriage for us. And Matt will talk a lot about prescriptive paths for Energy Star, but one great thing is that we can adjust our material list or SKU list to fit that prescriptive path. So together, working together, we look to resolve those collisions for master sets and site solid plan sets.
So let me just review for the audience if they don't remember. Justin and I did an episode early on in the Riesinger Build where we basically said, okay, here's the framing on this project, the bones of the house, so to speak. How do we fit in all the mechanicals to the house? Where we basically took our manual J design, and I brought my HVAC contractor into the office. I brought my plumber. I didn't worry so much about the electrician. We figured we can get those wires in most anywhere. But we had a big meeting at the office where we were able to zoom through the entire 3D drawings of the house and go, all right, how's this going to work? And then Justin's team integrated that MEP design into the model, the Revit model, right? Mm-hmm. So that when he says collision report, what he's saying is, okay, we got a trunk line running through this floor truss area. How's that going to work? And we're talking about this on kind of a one-off plan, right? Steve Basic designed this house. By the way, people can buy that plan and actually build that plan again, right? It's give us the website again.
BLDRplan.com.
BLDRplan.com. You can look up both my personal house and the Riesinger Build in there. But when you guys do a plan, Matthew, let's say for a large volume builder, are you doing a manual J for each specific house in like this division of Maryland and then another MEP for this same house that might get built in Nashville, Tennessee?
Yeah, so when we're building for or designing for a builder that works in multiple markets, we have to take into consideration a variety of things. One of the things that we have to look at is the trade base by market, because it's very important that as a designer, you understand that not every market builds the same way.
Right, great point.
You look at the Northeast part of the U.S., a lot of sheet metal, a lot of branch systems. You look at somewhere like Nashville, and there's almost no sheet metal. Everything's ductboard. So completely different friction rates, completely different sizes of trunk lines, et cetera, that have to be incorporated into the truss layouts and into the wall systems in some cases. So that's the beginning part, but then also looking at what's literally available. There are parts of the country where supply houses don't carry certain sizes of, say, for example, flex duct or round pipe. So it's very important that as a designer you understand that, and designing preferences. We may design a house in one market where we're using in an attic space, a conditioned attic space, we're using vertical equipment, but in some markets all the trades are used to seeing that equipment horizontal. So those are some of the things that we look at outside of obviously the right sizing. Now when we do a base set of designs, it's always worst case orientation. Mm-hmm. So the end user, the builder knows that, hey, when I'm building this floor plan in this climate zone, in this code driven market, the largest piece of equipment I'm going to have in this house, depending on orientation, is what's on our drawings. So everything after that would be lot specific and would either be that size or smaller.
Got it. That's fascinating. So then, Matthew, when you get that MEP design roughly complete or fully complete, I'm not sure which, how does your team, Justin, then take that for a volume builder or a mid-sized regional builder? Let's say somebody's doing 100 houses or more locally, and integrate that into the digital tools at BFS so that then that builder really knows, hey, when I send this package out that's pre-cut with ready frame or that has trusses on the floor or the roof, that it's going to work with their plan.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So we have kind of two paths we can take. Number one is your good old-fashioned PDF set where we just send that off to Matthew, and he kind of designs the PDF in CAD and then returns it back to us, and then we'll model it in Revit. or the preferred way is that we actually send in the Revit file. We're able to round trip that in and out of our component design, bring it back so we're structurally solved, and then go, okay, Matthew, here's the structurally solved plan with truss and ready frame in it. Now go do your magic. So that's our preferred path.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really evolved from, the Revit world was previously only commercial.
Yeah.
But what we've really seen in the last 5 years or so has been a real paradigm shift from doing things in AutoCAD to doing things in Revit for residential new construction.
Wow, that's wild. And is that getting adopted on a big scale from the kind of production builder world out there, or is this only the top 5 biggest names in the industry?
I don't think it's the top 5. I think that there's some regional players. And what's interesting is, as you well know from the residential new construction world, is that every year there's a silly season and people start moving around. So people that have become used to dealing with advanced practices at maybe a large regional or a national, when they find themselves in a new position at a new company, they bring those best practices with them. So we're really starting to see that technological approach kind of find its way down to markets where you wouldn't really expect to see it.
Oh, that's wild. How about on the digital side, Justin? Give me a couple examples of some regional builders, not the top 10 guys in the U.S., but the guys that are doing it really well at that kind of 100 to maybe a couple hundred volume a year. Can you think of somebody in particular that stands out?
No. Obviously, my frontline customer, Lanthorn Homes out of South Carolina, is adopted full digital, right, and saw the advantages of it, and that's a 700-unit builder. But we've seen
700 homes a year.
700 in the new development up there that they're doing in upstate.
And they're using your digital tools on all 700
Fully,
houses.
yeah. So everywhere from in home configure, we're actually giving them that for the marketing piece. We're then rendering the model digitally like we did your house. They go on the website, configure it. It then produces a CD set site solved with the colors out of it digitally, all through that experience, with the options built into the master plan sets, and then we can export that out. So that's one that's done it. But then LGI, Stanley Martin, just to name a few, are really making the change over to that.
There's some big names.
And they're realizing the power of Revit, right? It's that 3D model like you and I saw when we did the Risinger build. It's just there's a ton of power to looking at it in the Z axis and not just looking at it in the XY axis. So
yeah, and it's interesting. After I worked in the production world from 95 to 02, I worked for one of the nation's top 10 builders, and we build houses incredibly fast. I mean, probably 75 to 85 calendar days.
Right.
And I wouldn't say they were particularly well-built houses at that time. I'm hoping that builder has gotten a little better. Matthew, I'm hoping you're shaking your head that they are.
Absolutely.
But here I am 20-some years later, and I build, frankly, a pretty slow house. And some of that is deliberate and intentional. But when I built my house with you guys, Justin, I was absolutely blown away by how quickly the framing went when a couple things were in place ahead of time. Number one, I had a full, I wouldn't say I had a full MEP. I had a good manual J, and then we kind of filled in the blanks for an MEP with you in that digital tools process. Right. But you solved all the problems for me ahead of time. So I didn't come out there and go, oh, shoot, I got a truss in the way of this trunk line, or I got a beam in the way of whatever. We thought about everything ahead of time. It's like building your body on computer, like all the bones first, then okay, where do we put the lungs? Where does the heart fit? Where do we put the big veins? Where do we fit the small veins? So that when we were on site, everything just kind of clicked. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember the exact time. Did we frame that house in 12 days? Does that sound right?
12 days sounds right. Yeah, it was fast.
Start to finish. Yeah. Stupid fast for me. I'm not used to that. Like when I was a production builder, we'd frame a house in 3 or 4 days, right? The big boys do that. The guys in my shoes do not frame houses in 12 days typically. And that was fully waterproofed. I don't think that had windows in yet, but that was only a day or two later.
Right.
So, I mean, we're talking about speeds that can benefit everybody along the Rhine. Whether you're a volume builder that builds 10,000 houses a year, a regional that builds a couple hundred a year, or like me and I build a dozen a year, to be able to speed up that process, but also reduce the number of mistakes is a really big deal for people. Can you comment on that, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing it from custom. I mean, we have a builder here in Austin that we did a large custom on that we saw huge value out of. Right? They said,
Oh, I can say their name. This is a buddy of mine. This is Coates Homes, right?
Coates Homes, yep. Yeah. So we saw a huge value in that, and then they're adopting that now in the Dallas, the Dallas side of what they're doing, and just because they probably saw, hey, that cost of that saved us probably 3-4 times, once we got into figuring out what the issues were going to be. But then on the large builder side, I mean, it's just, the more master sets, change and evolve, and the more they're putting options and elevations on, that really starts to then mess with it. And that's where we see a ton of value in it.
I think that's what the custom builders like me have really resonated with the series with you, Justin, is they realize, look, I don't have a huge back office, right? I don't have 4 people or 5 people on the estimating like a volume builder does.
Right.
So to be able to utilize your team to help with that is a really big deal. And I think we're going to see that too on Stephanie Daly's build. She's just about to start framing in Utah. We're doing a new series, guys, coming out called Altitude Adjustment. And you'll see Justin on that series, and you'll see Stephanie build a house using the full BFS digital tools as well as a full ready frame package on a, 8 or 9 or 10,000 square foot
10,000 square foot custom.
It's a big boy.
Multi-layer. Yeah.
It's a big boy.
Right down the side of the mountain. But yeah, it was a very complex design.
Yeah,
so
that's going to be fun.
Yeah.
Matthew, I want to switch gears and go back from the custom guys to the really volume guys. When I was in my volume builder days, I don't think there was any manual J thought. There was really no MEP design. It was the trade showing up and going, all right, how do I put all these systems in the house?
Exactly.
Talk to me about how that's really changed over the 20 years that I've been out of the field for production
it's
builders.
changed a lot, and it's changed for a couple of reasons. Probably the biggest one has been as our homes have gotten tighter, it's become much more critical that the systems are sized and designed and installed properly, whereas previously construction was a lot more forgiving. The ACH levels of homes were so much higher than they are today that there's a lot more forgiveness. The management of moisture through the envelope has changed so much significantly that if you oversize or incorrectly install a system, today the likelihood of it creating a point or a broad moisture issue is significant, and that warranty exposure is huge. I mean, if you think about large production builders in the country and the set aside they have for warranty spend, that's a huge chunk of profitability for them. So it's become a huge point of focus for them as well. Let's minimize that. But you still have layers of different types of builders and capacities. So you have some builders that are in a position to direct purchase OEM equipment. So they may have a relationship with just a couple of manufacturers. They may have a relationship with one manufacturer.
So in other words, they've got, I'm just using, I don't know if it's true, but let's say Trane, right? They're buying Trane direct from Trane because they have so many houses they build a year. So then you have to only select equipment from the Trane catalog, probably.
Well, and not even just from the Trane catalog, but they'll pre-assess SKUs. So they'll have SKUs set up that identify the packages that are AHRI certified by location in the country where they're purchasing their equipment. And that creates a point of validation and verification for them for quality. By making sure that they have first access to that equipment from that OEM, it gets staged in any sort of supplier warehouse set aside for them, and their installing contractors are pulling from that pool versus showing up and saying, "What do you have?" I've got a 3-ton this. What kind of condenser do you have? And they pick whatever is available, and that's what they install.
Wow.
And so that's a direct point of control for those that have the ability to do that, to be able to make sure that the equipment being installed in their houses is the right matched equipment.
Wow, that's wild. Are any of those volume builders putting dehumidifiers in as a standard practice?
Not so much dehumidifiers as yet, but definitely variable speed, variable flow equipment.
Okay, wow.
Cool. Again, they work on purchase point pricing. So they may work with a Lennox or a Trane or a Carrier or Daikin and pick, you've got your Cadillac system. Maybe we'll make that available in some of our higher end, more semi-custom homes. But for the bulk of our production stuff, maybe we get a variable speed fan, but not variable refrigerant flow, and source out that sweet spot for them by market, and they may directly change what they buy in Southwest Florida versus what they're going to install in Nashville.
Right.
So they're looking at how do we optimize what's available, make sure that we have that first right of access to that equipment, and then try to maximize based on the sales point of the pricing of their home by market. What can we afford to put in that's going to help us control things like temperature and humidity?
Interesting. When I was a new home salesman I sold new homes from 2000 to 2002 in the Maryland market for a big national builder. I was a nerdy enough salesman that I always would upsell people on their HVAC systems, like, oh, you should definitely opt for the 2-speed compared to the standard 1-speed. Because this will run at 66% of its capacity, and that's really good for dehumidification. And I mean, here I was, this 30-year-old, right, or maybe 27-year-old, selling these people on a giant purchase. But I sold a lot of HVAC upgrades because I thought it was cool and it was important. I'm curious, from a very broad stroke, do you see the general public in America who's buying a custom home, or buying a production builder home, do you see those volume builders opting for better and better systems, either from customer request or because they see the value in a VRF system?
So yes, they are, and there's a variety of layers of importance based on the component in the calculation. So there's the comfort perspective, there's the moisture management perspective. There's very definitively the homeowner affordability perspective, that right-sized equipment that doesn't have to run at full speed has a huge impact on their operating costs of that home, which after the purchase of the home and insurance on the home is typically the most expensive part of the home is your operating expenses. Yeah. So getting operating expenses down for people is huge because it has a direct impact on how much disposable income they have for their mortgage. Yep. Still not a very robust process of valuing that into the appraisal process, but it's getting better. And then the last one is the life of the equipment. When the equipment gets sized properly and it's being selected properly from a moisture management as well as thermal comfort perspective, the equipment is going to be put in that's going to live for the anticipated life cycle from the OEM. Yeah. So OEMs are looking at it from a customer perspective that they don't want the end user of that home any more than the builder does to have a bad experience with their HVAC systems, and then in their mind connotate that manufacturer's product is
a problem.
Is a problem. Yeah. So that's an area where when you talk about manual J's, the vast majority of manual J's that we see done by contractors are poorly done. So much so that last year we developed a guide. We actually developed it for Fannie Mae, for just homeowners and or builders to be able to take a manual J and look and see where the most common errors are. Oh, wow. And they're not necessarily made intentionally, but they're often just default values that contractors have just traditionally used.
Yeah. Speaking of default values, you mentioned that you're seeing production builders get tighter and tighter on their blower door scores. Are they getting tested? Like, are production builders testing their blower doors on their houses? Yeah. Do you have any sense for where they're at on blower door scores out there?
Most builders that we see across the country can pretty routinely get to between 4 and 5 ACH. Okay. Just with good basic practices. Yeah. We see a lot more builders going to things like AeroSeal that are intentionally trying to get down to 2 ACH or lower.
It's awesome. I love to hear that.
Typically, what we're seeing, and a lot of it, we're also seeing being driven not just by code changes and above code programs, but also being driven by incentives from utility companies. So there are some utility companies, like there's a couple in the Carolinas, that you can't get to any of their tiers of incentives unless you get to sub 4 ACH. Mm-hmm. So that's the first barrier of entry to even get their base incentive. Right. And then if you as a builder want to get to a couple $1,000s per home. It's 4 ACH or lower, and then you start to add in more efficient equipment and better performing duct leakage, lower ACH.
You guys don't do any testing though?
Yeah, we do.
Oh, your company
test,
does too?
yeah.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. Because I was curious, if you have a 5 ACH 50 versus a 2 ACH 50, it probably really does make a difference in that manual J load calc, right? Because if I've got all this infiltration in a hot, humid market in particular, I got an extra moisture load. I've got all these additional problems in the house if I've got a higher infiltration rate. So it's interesting to hear. So does that manual J from that production builder change from builder to builder, knowing that this guy has AeroSeal, for instance, and this guy doesn't?
Yeah, so when we work with BFS and we model their compliance package, that's part of it, is looking at, what are you as the builder going to commit to? If it's something like using AeroSeal to get to a consistent 2 ACH, then that gets put into the energy modeling. When we look at what windows are they going to use, if it's going to be Pella, if it's going to be what type of sheathing they're going to use, what type of insulation they're going to use, are they going to do continuous insulation on the exterior, are they going to do it on the interior, are they doing flash and bat systems, whatever they're looking at, we model each of those options for them, and when they pick the package that from a cost perspective works for them, we have weighted for them not just cost, but we've also weighted for them how consistently are you going to be able to implement this? Because if you pick a really complex path to implement, the likelihood of it experiencing failure is pretty high, and that doesn't help them either. Right. So it is cost, but it's also complexity. And then the third component does there need to be a design change in the home to implement the strategy that the builder is considering? And then once all those options are figured out, then it gets plugged into BFS's system to align those packages so that they said we're going to use this triple pane window in this market, we're going to use this insulation, we're going to use this size framing. All of that gets plugged in. But then, yes, that ACH has to be part of their validation process, and they've got to be committed to it. And that's one of the things that we see that a lot of builders overlook, is making sure that once they've made those decisions, whether it's from a building science perspective or a procurement perspective, they've got to make changes to their scopes of work. They've got to ensure that their trades are on board with making sure that, hey, this is the program we're following, this is the package that's going to show up from BFS. Here's what you as the trades have got to be able to do for us consistently.
All right, that's fascinating. I gotta tell you, Matthew, as a custom builder, I have typically, and this is probably more information than you want to hear, but I've typically looked down on those production builders like, oh, those poor guys, they don't build a very good house, and I'm so much further than them. But as I'm hearing what you're saying about what production builders are doing, I think there's a lot of custom guys who are actually behind the production builders when it comes to MEP planning, pre-planning, utilizing things like builders' first sources, digital tools, ReadyFrame, making their organization and their processes more streamlined to reduce errors in the field. I suspect there's a lot of listeners that still are using their HVAC contractor to provide a manual J and to install whatever they think is appropriate without really much oversight at all.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, most HVAC contractors, when they get to the infiltration rate part input on the manual J, they're just going to put in standard construction
Default,
or maybe
right.
semi-tight. Whereas if you're using blower door testing to validate your performance level, then you put in blower door method, and you plug in the ACH that you've agreed you're going to get to. And it has a huge difference on the load calculation.
Yeah. I got a very side note question for you. That's really one that I'm curious about for my own personal houses. If you have a slightly oversized system, whether it's a VRF, meaning variable capacity on the condenser or not, but you put a dehumidifier in, does that add some extra forgiveness to the system, or do I still pay a penalty when I'm oversized on my equipment based on my loads?
Well, anything that's adding heat to the house, as long as it's in the calculation accurately, both the energy calculation and the equipment sizing, you can find that sweet spot between getting the benefit of moisture removal, as long as you've accounted for that added heat load. It's the same with ERVs. When we look at installing
Great
an
point.
ERV, there's additional electrical consumption. There's additional treatment
Heat
of
and
air.
moisture load too,
absolutely.
frankly.
So while ERVs have a huge impact on energy calculations, they have to also be incorporated effectively along with things like supplemental dehumidification into the load. So if you had a slightly oversized system from just a comfort and moisture management perspective, just looking at your sensible and latent cooling, if you add in some of the additional energy that's being put into the home from things like supplemental dehumidification, it may not be oversized.
Yeah, that's right.
Or it may be closer to, in that sweet spot of sizing.
One thing that's been really fun for me, Matthew, is I built a house for my family a couple years ago, and I lived in an okay/crappy remodel for a long time that was not particularly great. It was ducts out of the conditioned space and a 4 ACH 50. So I moved into my new house, and I built it very, very tight. I think my final blower door score was around 0.65 or so ACH 50. I have all the top of the line equipment. I've got a great Mitsubishi VRF. I've got 2 dehumidifiers, one upstairs, one down, and I've got a really top of the line kind of Cadillac system for an ERV. I've got a Zender that's all fully ducted. But one thing that was really interesting for me, having lived there, was I set it up when I moved in with the ASHRAE 62.2 numbers. And I found that my humidity was typically a little higher than I wanted, and ultimately realized I am overventilating my house. So the ASHRAE standard was, if you've heard Joe Stiebrick talk, was like lick his finger and say, "Oh, that number," right? Like there is no perfect scientific evidence to say you need this amount of CFMs perfectly for this house with the 3 occupants or whatever. And living in that has been fascinating for me, because after about 2 years, was like, gosh, I feel like my dehumidifiers are running a lot. I have great variable speed equipment, but it's working hard because I'm putting too much outside air in.
Yeah, they're working against each other.
Exactly. And even though my ERV was like the world's best, it still wasn't perfect. And so if it's real humid out, it's still bringing in a lot of darn humidity when it's humid out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is great. I sleep great in my house. I love the fresh air, but I turned it down to about half of what ASHRAE 62.2 was, maybe 18 months. Well, Build Show Live, not like a year ago.
Yeah.
Or maybe a few months before that. And I've been just as comfortable at a lower ventilation rate. I didn't notice it at all. I even have a CO2 monitor in the house, and I've never had an issue with CO2 being high. So it's one of these things where I feel like the next frontier for all builders, including production builders, is to be able to encourage our clients to understand their systems and make changes over time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's also a very important thing that production builders are grappling with, that perhaps custom builders have less of an issue overcoming, is that all of these systems and all of this technology is great, but if it isn't maintained, then that day one level of delivery is just going to go downhill from there.
That's a great point.
And, when we design for a builder, for the first time they're using an ERV, the first thing is, where the heck am I going to put this thing? And the second thing is, what's it going to look like, the inlets and outlets on the house, and who's going to complain about that? And then the last thing they think about is, who's going to get to the filters?
Service.
And who's going to clean things? And who's going to maintain them? And what homeowner is aware of? I mean, you can barely get homeowners to change rock catchers on spun filter on a regular system.
Rock catchers up there, I don't like that.
I mean, that's so it's trying to adapt to
the basic filter,
the downstream benefits of the systems. And you talk about finding the sweet spot for you. Look at ASHRAE 55. Thermal comfort for human occupancy is not a number.
Right.
And people forget that it's a perception, and a lot of it has to do with the homeowners. And so sometimes we actually look at that for production builders, and when they're looking at a product and they say, this is an entry-level product, it has this type of consumer, we need to consider that when we look at design. Same thing happens when you look at active adult. People that are going to be in their homes more. So when you're looking at manual J calculations, you need to take that into effect when you're considering where am I going to put my people loads. where are the people going to be in the home?
Yep.
Because that changed a lot during COVID too. Suddenly people were at home, kids were at home from school, people were working from home, and their homes probably weren't designed for that.
Yeah.
So we had to adapt to that and learn from that.
And to your point, we need our homeowners to either be willing to do the maintenance themselves or frankly willing to pay someone to do that maintenance. I was thinking while you were talking, my old house, I lived across the street from my current house.
Yeah.
Justin's been there. My old house had one zone for the whole house, had one upflow unit with a 1-inch pleated filter, and I changed it maybe every 60 days, and it took me all of a minute to change the filter and put it back in. My new house, I have 5 zones. That means 5 pieces that need either cleaning or a new filter. I have 2 dehumidifiers, and I've got an ERV that has 3 filters at the unit plus a filter at each individual head. So I've gone from 1 filter in the whole house to more. I probably have close to 20 filters in my new house, and I actually am not great at changing my mini split heads that are really high and a pain. And so now twice a year, I've got my HVAC guy coming out to make sure that I'm doing a good enough job of them so I don't dirty up my mini split heads. And I've got my 17-year-old changing on a calendar note all of the filters that are a pain to get to because I don't want to crawl on my knees to get to that filter in the attic anymore.
Right.
But it is a really good point that we need to remember that to get a really good HVAC system means that you have a fair amount of filters that need to be touched and maintained and worked on. And if we don't, I can only imagine in your diagnostic days some of the ridiculously nasty stuff you saw either from a mold perspective or from a filter perspective. Any funny stories on any of that you care to share?
I mean, we've definitely seen some interesting ones out there from, condition crawls that are not really condition crawls.
Oh no!
To slurry coats in crawl spaces, but they're not a moisture barrier. Definitely seen a lot of humidification issues that result in massive mold growth inside HVAC systems.
So humidifiers, you mean, not dehumidifiers?
Well,
right?
even just dehumidifiers that have not been kept clean.
Oh, there you go.
So then they stop working effectively, and when you've got exposed insulation as sound measurement control inside an air handling unit, it's a great place to catch dirt and create mold. So.
Great point.
Definitely things that need to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, the thing is, in markets like ours, we have a lot of fresh air intake coming in, right? And with our humidity levels the way they are, you're just pumping the house full of humidity, and you never get it back out of there. And then on top of that, you've got duct and unconditioned space, not designed right. I mean, you can imagine just what's in those ducts. I mean, it's crazy.
I think Texas is the moldiest ductwork in the nation, frankly.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that we've seen in probably the last 8 years as houses have started to really consistently get, tight is, it's great you hit a blower door number of, 3.5 ACH, but where is that 3.5 coming in? And the vast majority of the time, unfortunately, we see, it's coming in at, the sill level.
Attic.
Or at the attic level, but places where the ducts are.
Right.
An installer may run ducts around the perimeter of a house in a bulkhead, and that's where the house leakage is. And then suddenly you've got condensation on that sheet metal, and you got a beautiful house, and the people of this it changes seasons. It's their first summer in the house, and suddenly there's all these spots where the moisture is dripping off of the ductwork and going through the drywall. And it's still a 3 ACH house. And they're like, how can this be? Well, it's 3 ACH coming in someplace. And if it's coming in contact with cold sheet metal, condensation.
Builder liability is a big deal for me. And I don't know if you know my story, Matthew, but I went through the big mold crisis of 2002 when I worked in Portland, Oregon, after having worked for a big national production builder. And I just saw all kinds of moldy issues in Portland. And then we also had the big LP siding crisis at that time where a bunch of houses were having mushrooms grow out of them. And we also built a bunch of houses with EFIS.
Installed wrong.
Fake stucco installed wrong. So here I was, this young builder. I was around 31, 32, and I had, at any one time, I had a dozen lawsuits with unhappy clients and industrial hygienists, air sampling houses, and moms that thought their kids were going to die of black mold. I thought the world was caving in on us as builders. But it really, just came down to I didn't know a thing. I never heard the term building science. I didn't know anything about moisture management and what moisture would do. And so, it's really basic and elementary stuff. We start with bulk water, and we need to make sure our houses don't leak. And then once we make sure our houses don't leak water, then we actually need to pay a lot of attention to not leaking air, because air brings with it a lot of moisture. And just to your point, when that moisture comes in and you're in a place where there's air conditioning going on, now I've got a dew point. I've got 55 or 60 degree air somewhere that all of a sudden that humid air can find a place to condense. So, one of the big reasons why I started the Build Show originally was just that I was trying to not make mistakes that would get me in legal trouble with clients. And here I am all these years later, and I still feel like I have more to learn.
There's always more to learn, but one of the things that we've been very successful at is then taking that building science knowledge and perspective and applying it to best practices and common sense in construction. When you work with production builders, the resistance to change is significant. The willingness to adapt to new technology is slow.
Yep.
And the willingness to make the investment sometimes in those best products and best practices is counterintuitive to their objectives. So finding a way to find that sweet spot of applying technology in a way that can be done cost effectively, that's the thing that we work with BFS all the time is, maybe that triple pane window isn't the best option for this builder. Maybe it's a higher performing double pane for this market, and we can find a better combination of solutions of products to get them to where they need to be, and in a cost effective manner that works for them.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's to us, that's the most likelihood of successful adoption of new technology is to make it affordable.
That's fabulous.
It is the beauty of our partnership, because there are 7-8 prescriptive paths to get in there if you're doing the Energy Star, and I will say a lot of nationals are chasing that tax rebate, so that drives, I think, a lot of behavior. But the thing is that we're getting to is a predictable bill of material. That's what every builder wants, right? And with our blending of technology, that's what we're producing and creating for the builders.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
If people listening are interested in working with either one of you guys, either Builders First Source or PEG, what is the kind of ideal builder that would work with your companies, and what's the best way for people to get a hold of your companies?
For PEG, solutions at PEGENV.com is the best way to get in touch with us. And we really work with every type of builder. We work with multifamily, we work with single family attached, detached, we work with commercial. But for
custom
us,
residential as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Cool.
we just finished a 19,000 square foot all geothermal, full MEP design.
Dang, that's awesome.
We
Very
worked.
cool.
We worked on the Whisper Valley project out here.
Oh yeah, cool.
Doing the projected HERS scores and solar calculations for them,
Fabulous.
as well as the manual J's for the geothermal. Working with Lennar right now in Colorado with their Dandelion geothermal. So, and then all the way down to like you said, to small custom builders. So we work with a lot of architects that do really interesting custom design stuff. But our sweet spot when it comes to inspections and testing in the field is going to be somebody that's 100 units a year or more.
Okay.
But from the HVAC design or MEP design, it can be a single product, or it can be a portfolio of products. Often we have a builder come to us and say, this is our portfolio, our baseline of 80 floor plans we like to build, and we'll build out that whole portfolio for them. And then just make adaptations to that as code changes or as they add new options to it, et cetera.
That's awesome. Very cool.
Yeah, which then we would apply the SKU to our market for that, right? So that's the beauty of partnerships, is we can take his design, his solution path, and then put our SKU level on it at the local level with 550 plus locations. We have the ability to do that.
550 locations.
Yeah.
Goodness gracious. How many states is BFS in now?
Last I heard we were in 48 at 50.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
Wow. So you've got a lot of coverage.
Well, I think we're in every major MSA except a few like Chicago. That's a lot of remodel but we actually have coverage there now. But we're in every large MSA.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And we mentioned at the top of the hour, but BLDR is it Plan or Plans?
Plan, PLAN. Yeah.
BLDRPLAN.com. They've got how many? Like 100 and some?
Oh, 440.
Oh my gosh, you've gone up almost 500 plan sets on there, including my own personal house that I live in, and the Reisinger build. And they're very, very reasonable in cost, by the way. They're not super expensive. And then you can take that plan and go, okay, here's the lot and location I'm building on. Matthew's company could do a full MEP design for you. Then you could take that back to your local BFS location and say, okay, I'm interested in using digital tools. I really want to understand how I can build this thing most efficiently. And I want to do a pre-cut ready frame package. They can do all that for you, including selling you the Pella window package, let's say, and really doing so much of the material supply. I mean, I've bought from these guys for 20 years now. Everything on the interior door package, the exterior door package, all my interior trim, all came from my local builder source right here in Austin. So these guys are a huge supply house, but now they have the ability to do quite a bit in your back office as well. And I think of Justin and his team as really my in-house architecture team, where I can do some architecture and some basics, but they can do a lot of the heavy lifting to get me to a CD set on the job site.
I mean, we can go everywhere from schematic to an SD set to DD set to then full CD sets in Revit is the nice piece of that. And again, fact is we can round trip it in and out. Component ready frame design coming back in, and then obviously that then can feed to Matt. So it's a lot of pre-con, but the cost savings and just the time to save and build downtime for whatever issues may arise. Typically, it's all paid for, and then some.
For sure.
And that's the neat part about it. And BLDR.com is our main website. That there's a ton of information on there, but we can help kind of top to bottom, right? And I don't want to forgive either the installed services. I'll just tell you for Front Light up and what we're doing for their Lanthorn product, we're doing 50% of the job. I mean, we're installing 50% of the build.
Oh my gosh! Holy cow!
We have major, we have markets where we have a ton of installed services as well.
That's incredible.
Yeah, just trying to drive efficiency for the builder.
That's fantastic, guys. Really appreciate you taking the time and the distance travel too, Matthew, because you came a long way. As you flew from Dallas, which was a little shorter. Matthew came all the way from DC, which is a long flight. You had an early morning, brother. So, guys, if you're not currently a subscriber, hit that subscribe button below. We've got new podcasts every single Friday. If not, follow us on the Facebook or the Instagrams. Otherwise, we'll see you next time on the Build Show podcast.